Now let's bring in the cost curves and understand where profit is maximized. Now we're going to do this separately for perfect and imperfect competition. So the graph you see over here is for perfect competition. Let's discuss for perfect competition and then we will talk about imperfect competition after that. So as you can see over here, the demand curve, the price and the MR, this is for the perfect competition. It is flat, horizontal. And now this is your short-term marginal cost. Now what does that mean? It means for every additional unit that the firm produces, what is the cost of producing that unit? Now initially it is very high. Think of a bakery that makes bread. So if you're going to make a 1 unit of bread at home, it's probably going to cost you a lot, right? And as you increase, as you start buying flour in bulk, and as you start buying specialized equipment for baking, maybe you set up a flour mill for getting your flour, and you start directly buying the wheat from the farmers, your cost will come down. Your marginal cost, the cost of producing each additional unit, the marginal cost is going to start coming down. It will come down and then eventually it will start going up. Now, why does cost start going up? So a lot of things happen, and we will talk about this economies of scale shortly, but just to give you a little bit of a preview into that, some factors like think about wheat. Okay, so let's just carry on with this bread example, that if you keep buying the wheat for making bread, then the farmers will eventually increase the price of wheat which they are giving to you, because people want to use wheat for making maybe biscuits as well and making pasta as well. So at up to a certain point, the benefits of economies of scale are there, that you increase your quantity and your cost does go down, but then after a certain point it starts going up again. And there are other factors such as bureaucracy, that the business becomes too big to manage, and then there's just inefficiencies that come in as you increase the quantity. So now what happens with your marginal cost as it starts going up? Now, as long as it was coming down, it was pulling down both your total cost and your variable cost. So this is your variable cost coming down, this is your total cost coming down, and it is being pulled down by the marginal cost. But as soon as your marginal cost starts going up, it starts pulling up the variable cost as well, and then eventually it starts pulling up the total cost as well, right? Up until this point, this Q star, up until this point, every unit that you are selling is costing you less, because this is the marginal cost curve, which means the cost is still less than the price, right? All of this shaded area is your profit. Now, of course, the profit is higher, is increasing up until this point over here, but then it's still there. I mean, you're still in positive profit. Every additional unit is bringing some profit. Okay, it's not bringing as much as it was initially, but it is still bringing in some profit up until this point, which is Q star, that if you will decide to sell beyond Q star, the cost will be higher than the price, and that obviously makes no business sense to sell something which costs more than what you're selling it for, right? So profit will be maximized at this Q star, where your every unit you have sold up until this point is costing you less than you're selling it for. Of course, there is an exception for these units over here where your cost was more, but that is a very small amount, and we don't look at that. What we look at is this whole portion over here where our cost is actually lower than what is our selling price. So where exactly is the profit maximization point? Where MC is equal to MR. Now this is something you have to remember. MC is equal to MR is where your profit is maximized. And this is something which is also going to be true for imperfect competition. So even though right now we're talking about perfect competition where the demand is flat and the price and MR is the same, but this MC is equal to MR is going to be true for imperfect competition as well. And that's very logical, right? Because I mean, as long as the cost, the marginal cost of producing something is lower than the money that product is bringing in terms of its sales, in terms of its revenue, it makes business sense because it costs less, it's bringing in more revenue. We should keep producing. But the minute the cost is more than the revenue, the cost is going above the price, we don't want to do that business anymore. So, of course, here it says SMC, and the S is for short run marginal cost. That is, of course, something you have to remember. But at a general level, what we say is that marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, and that is where profit is maximized. Note that marginal cost also equals marginal revenue at this point, but that is not the point that at which profit is maximized. It is the second point where the MC curve intersects with the price that where with marginal revenue, where the profit is maximized, not this first one. Now, see, what happens is that in perfect competition, people will come in, more firms will come in, and they will put downward pressure on the price until they are just making enough profit which justifies the risk of the business. Now, what does that mean? See, here, first, let me take you through two scenarios where, let's say, the market price rises. If market price rises, and let's say this is the new price, then this is where the MC is going to equal MR, and therefore your quantity of profit maximization will increase, right? So it will be to the right of Q star. If, however, prices are going down, then what will happen is that your MC is going to intersect with MR over here, and the profit maximization quantity will be to the left of Q star. Now, coming to the discussion about the new firms entering and putting downward pressure on the price, right now there is a positive economic profit because the market price is above the total average cost. Now look at your total average cost curve. This is your total average cost curve, and we will be producing at this quantity level at which price is here and quantity is here, and this is the profit maximization price and quantity. And look at this difference. We are actually selling above our cost. Now in economics, cost includes the cost of capital, which means whoever are the providers of capital to this firm, whether they are bondholders or the bank which has given a loan or the stockholders which have given equity to this business, their cost of capital is already included in this average total cost. Therefore, that means the profit that is being made, the price that is being charged per unit is more than the average total cost. And if the average total cost already includes a justifiable profit for your providers of capital, then there is more than normal profit being created, and that we call positive economic profit. Therefore, what will happen is that new firms will enter, they will reduce the price and bring it to this level where MC is going to meet MR at the point where your average total cost is the lowest. And that is why perfect competition is very good for the society at large, because what happens is that society gets a lower priced product, right? But this only happens if we're talking about completely homogeneous products. Now coming to the imperfect competition, and of course the extreme of this is a monopoly, that it can charge whatever price they want, and they are having the same type of cost curves in terms of marginal cost and variable cost and total cost, where the marginal cost goes down but then it starts coming up, right? And then it pulls up your variable cost, and then it also pulls up your total cost. The only difference is here we don't have this flat price which was the same as marginal revenue and average revenue. Here we have a downward sloping demand curve and a downward sloping MR curve which is even lower than the demand curve. Now here the MR is going to intersect with the MC at this point over here, right? This is your MR and MC, and that is your profit maximizing quantity and profit maximizing price. So even though the marginal revenue curve and the demand curves are different, but the rule of the optimal output level is the same. That is where MC is equals to MR. And as a monopoly, they have pricing power, so they can control the price at which they want to sell and the quantity that they want to sell. And as you can clearly see, the price is greater than the total cost. This is the total cost, average per unit cost total, and the price is also per unit, but there is clearly a huge gap which will obviously create positive economic profits. And here these economic profits will be there in the long run because nobody can force a monopoly to reduce their price unless the government steps in. But no other firms will be able to enter because it's a monopoly, right? And that is why, since the barriers to entry are there, and that prevents competition, so the downward pressure on price will not be there, and this firm will be able to enjoy positive economic profits in the long run. Now this is very important for you as an analyst, because if you want to invest in a company, you want to do it where it is operating in an industry where there is some pricing power. Because as you can see, in order to maximize profit, it's very important to control the price at which you sell and the quantity you sell at that price, right? And on a positive economic profit. Because otherwise what happens is that economic profit becomes zero, and that doesn't mean there is going to be zero accounting profit. Accounting profit will still be there, right? You'll have a company with some sales, some expenses, and some profit. I'm just writing it simply. Of course, a statement is much more complicated than that, and that, of course, you will see that in detail in your financial statement analysis sections. But the point is that this is accounting profit that you see in an accounting statement. This is accounting profit, which is then used to pay your providers of capital, such as equity stockholders, right? But in economic profit, this cost of capital, which includes the cost paid to equity holders, and even within your expenses, you will have an interest cost going to the bank, that is also included in the economic costs. So once a business makes enough profit, that is a decent justifiable amount for the providers of capital, then that means that even though the accounting profit is positive, but the economic profit is zero. Only when the business is making a profit which is more than what is justified, then we will say that the economic profit is positive, and that will only happen if your price is going to be greater than your average total cost. But if price is going to be equal to average total cost, or the average price is going to be equal to the average total cost, and the total revenue is equal to the total cost, and here obviously cost includes the cost of capital, then economic profit will be zero. The firm will be at the break-even point, and of course accounting profit will be there, but economic profit will be zero. And this you can see over here that the price has come down from previously what we were seeing, and it is now at a point where average total cost curve is minimum, and that is very good for society at large. That is why perfect competition is very, very good for the people, because they get a lower price. Now in a monopoly, why would they lower their price and operate at a level where the average total cost curve is equal to the price? Usually, the government makes them do this and think of PCR tests or COVID vaccines or masks that you might have a monopoly or maybe even an oligopoly where there's just a few firms like Pfizer and Moderna and whichever were these firms making the vaccines, but the government probably forced them to reduce their price. Otherwise, even if they wanted, they could have charged a higher price. So that in this type of a scenario, you can have a break even where the price is set at the average total cost level, and this is your break even for both of them, where your economic profit is zero because your price is set at a level where your average total cost is the same as the price. All right. Now let's talk about the negative side of things. Let's say business is not good, your revenue is less than your cost, right? So at what point do you shut down? This relates to something which we have to understand in terms of short run and long run. Now, in the short run, variable costs and fixed costs are not fixed, because variable costs in terms of your buying of your raw material and your labor, that is something which you can reduce, but your fixed costs are fixed, right? So your variable costs are not fixed, but your fixed cost is fixed. However, in the long run, your variable cost and even your fixed cost, they are both not fixed. You can reduce your fixed cost in the long run as well. So if business is not good, you can reduce your variable cost, but your fixed cost will be fixed in the short run. But if it continues to be not good, then you will even reduce your fixed cost and shut down the business. So what we're talking about over here is that, let's say if your revenue is greater than your variable cost, right? But it is not covering all of your costs. So it's not covering your total cost, which includes both variable and fixed, but it is covering your variable cost. In that situation, we will continue to operate in the short run because at least it is covering our variable cost and it is contributing something towards covering our fixed cost. So let's say we have a fixed cost of 5,000 and a variable cost of 4,000, and we are getting a revenue of, let's say, 5,000. Now from this revenue, this 4,000 is being covered, right? So what do we have left? 1,000 still. From 5,000 we paid 4,000 for the variable cost, and this 1,000 we can still use to pay for our fixed cost. So our fixed cost of 4,000 will be left from 5,000. So yes, we still have a loss, but at least our loss has been reduced from 5 to 4,000. But in the long run, what we will do is that we will say, no, our variable cost is covered, but our fixed cost is not covered, so we will exit. However, if the revenue falls below the variable cost as well, which means that, let's say your variable cost is 4,000, your fixed cost is 5,000, and your revenue is 3,000. So your revenue is not even covering your variable cost, what to talk about covering your fixed cost. So in that scenario, we will shut down even in the short run. And of course, if the revenue is covering both variable and fixed, that is total cost is covered, then we will continue to operate in the short run and in the long run. So this is a little bit of a confusing chart because we've got three different prices over here. And let's talk about the first price, which is $150, let's say. Then we will talk about the next one, which is $100. Now, let's say you're operating at $150, which is the high price. And between this region, where the MC is between, let's say, B and D. Now, your price is obviously more than your cost. So you're happy and you'll stay in business. But if the price is lower, right? Or if, let's say that the business is quantity is coming down and you are below this break even point. So here in this region between A and B, what's happening is that your total cost is not being covered, right? So if you're operating somewhere over here, your total cost is not being covered. You are below your total cost. And even though your variable cost is being covered, so you will continue to operate in the short term because some of this recovery is there that you are earning more than your variable cost, but you're not covering your total cost. So you will continue to operate in the short term, but you will close down in the long run. Now look at this point, even below this, and that is where the shutdown comes, that if you fall below, if your price falls below your average variable cost, this means that you're not even covering your variable cost, and it does not make any sense to sell even one unit because it's not even going to cover its raw material or its variable cost. And that is your shutdown point, that below your average variable cost you will shut down even in the short run. So this is the interpretation of this graph, that at 150 you're happy. 150 is the price at which you're happy, but 100 is the price at which you're breaking even, because at this point your total cost is covered, average total cost is covered. For each unit that you're selling, the price is equal to the average total cost. So the average cost per unit is equal to the price per unit, and this is where you are breaking even. But below this you start to get worried, and especially when you get to this point, it's very, very bad, because not only are you not covering your total cost, you're not even going to cover your variable cost below A, right? And that is where your shutdown is going to be there, right? So we initially spoke about the short run and long run, that in the short run the fixed cost is fixed, but your variable cost is not fixed. But in the long run, even your fixed cost is variable. So look at this short term total cost curves, that in the short run your cost is going up, it's going up, it's going up, but then when you come to this point you can expand your business. So initially, let's say you're having a bakery from your house, you're using your house oven, and your cost is going up because obviously it's breaking down all the time, it's not made for rugged use. So what you do is you invest in industrial grade baking oven, and then your cost doesn't go up that much, but then it starts shooting up again, but you don't allow that, and you invest in a even bigger plant, and then your short term total cost is under control again. Now what's happening over here is that if you're going to increase your size of the business, naturally it's going to require more capital. Now capital is fixed in the short run, but it is not fixed in the long run. So as you're expanding, you can in the long run keep increasing your size of the plant, right? So now your long run total cost curve is going to be a combination of all these short run curves, where instead of, so once you get from this point to here, now instead of going up from this point, what you're going to do is you'll carry on from the lowest point of this curve to the next one, right? And then when you get to this point, instead of going up from here, what you will do is you will carry on to the lowest point of this curve. So your total cost is going up, but it's not going up that much, because every time you get to this point of inflection, what you will do is you will move to a bigger plant, and then you will move to a bigger plant. And this long run total cost curve is called the envelope curve, and it envelopes or encompasses all the combinations of technology, plant, size, and physical capital. Now this is total cost. It is obviously going up as your business is increasing, but if you divide the cost with the number of units and you calculate an average cost, what you will see is that it comes down, right? But even the average cost, let's say this is you making bread from your home, it comes down, the average cost per bread comes down, but it starts to go up. But beyond this point, you're not going to make it in home anymore, you're going to invest invest in an industrial grade place, and then you'll jump on to the next curve, and your average cost keeps coming down. And then when it starts shooting up again, you move to the next one, and then it keeps going down. But then look what happens, that it starts going up, and that is where your diseconomies of scale come in. So you have to stop at this point, because up until this point you're getting economies of scale, which means as you're expanding, your cost is coming down. But then beyond this point, there is diseconomies of scale. And let's say you're buying all the flour available in your local area, and people who want to use flour for making biscuits or pasta, they are not getting flour, and then the price of your raw material starts going up exponentially. Or maybe there is bureaucracy in your business. You've got various branches of your bakery, and there's a lot of fraud going on. So all these factors are there which contribute to diseconomies of scale. So there is an optimum level at which your cost is being minimized, and you don't want to produce beyond that, right? And that is this point where it declines, the per unit cost declines in the short run, and then it keeps declining from one unit to the next in the short run as you expand your business, and then you just have to stop at that optimum point, right? Because as plant size increases, the per unit cost decreases up until the short run average total cost number 3. And this is done by connecting these. So the long run curve that you see over here, the long run average total cost curve, is actually created by connecting the lowest points of the lowest level of the short term curves. And that's how you're seeing this long run curve being made. And the shape of the long run curve depends on whether it is facing economies of scale. So this part is economies of scale, that is why it's coming down, and then the diseconomies of scale starts, and hence the shape of the long run curve starts going up, right? So economies of scale is the decrease in the long run cost as output increases, where the slope of the long run curve is negative. And then obviously this is optimized at Q3, which represents your economies of scale. And then beyond that, beyond this minimum efficient scale, what will happen is that you're going to get diseconomies of scale, where it starts going up to the right of Q3. Now, what are the factors that create economies of scale, and what are the factors that create diseconomies of scale? So let's talk about economies of scale first. So naturally, buying in bulk, right, it's going to lower your prices. You will reduce waste, you will have better quality control, effective decision making, better technology, better equipment, division of labor and management. So of course all of this is true. As you increase your business, your cost comes down. But then what happens is that your cost starts going up again, and that is because, again, I mean, if you're going to start pulling all the labor in your local area, then other people won't get any labor, and then obviously each additional labor that's going to come is going to ask for a higher price, because other people will be willing to pay them higher prices because they need labor as well, right? And the same goes for the wheat that you're buying. Or let's say you're making cheese, and if you start buying up all the milk, then people who want to use milk for other purposes will then obviously be willing to pay higher prices for that, and your cost will go up. You could have overlapping business functions. When organizations get very big, bureaucracy creeps in, where you've got people, you can have multiple departments doing the same work, and there's a lot of duplication. There might be improper management. There could be a lot of supply bottlenecks, high resource costs. Again, as discussed, that you could face a bottleneck in your supply, and all of this leads to your diseconomies of scale.